My guest today on Podcast for Inquiry is Mark Maharaj. Mark has been a volunteer with CFIC since 2012, helping run the Ottawa branch where he resides. He is a computer programmer with interests in other subjects including ethics, theology, philosophy, effective altruism, psychology, scientific skepticism, ethical veganism, and critical thinking. He is an avid hiker and enjoys the outdoors. In today's Podcast for Inquiry, I speak with Mark about antinatalism, what it is, what it isn't, and how it compares with other worldviews, including pronatalism. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I expect you will too. I bring you my discussion of antinatalism with Mark Maharaj. At Mark's request, this episode was recorded audio only. Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers, we have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. CFIC's own Mark Maharaj, thank you for speaking with me today on Podcast for Inquiry.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about a topic that is fairly new to me, one called anti-natalism. Now, one can guess what it means just from the name, but I'm going to give you a naive definition. I want you to tell me how right or how wrong I am. Now, anti is pretty clear. That means you're against, and I know from like neonatal wards, natalism or natal means something that's just been born, like an infant immediately after birth. So my guess would be that antinatalism is essentially you're against people giving birth or bringing new people into the world. Is that a fair definition of what antinatalism is? And if I'm wrong, please do correct me.
I'd say a small caveat is that this is in the realm of ethics, so that I would define it as a ethical prescription, and a conclusion that it is always unconditionally unethical to procreate. Okay. Now, there's some variations where it includes moral agents creating moral patients or moral subjects, which can extend to non-human persons, which is my particular view. But there are differences.
Right. So we'll get into that. So it is always so, but in summary, in your view, it's morally or it's unethical to bring people into the world. I'd like to know why. I mean, I can have some sympathy under certain circumstances. I've had to apologize to my children more than once. I have 4, so clearly I'm not an antinatalist. For essentially the condition of the world that we collectively are bequeathing to them. And I think that might be something that many parents have done to their children throughout the ages. And certainly I wouldn't be taking the opposite stance where it would be a moral imperative to reproduce. And I've heard many people, or some people have said things like, you lead an incomplete life if you don't procreate, if you don't have children of your own. And I personally consider that a fairly ridiculous statement. But you take it, it sounds like you're taking this, the antinatalist view, a step further. It's not contingent on circumstances. It's not because the world is a mess and so we shouldn't bring more people into it. And I don't even think, from what you've said so far, it's not like there are already too many people, so we should stop reproducing. Yours is a much broader statement. So why do you think it is always and everywhere? And if that's not correct, please correct. Tell me where it might be permissible. Why is it always and everywhere a bad idea, or an unethical proposition to have children?
Yeah. So for me, I'd stick to the ethical and not moral.
Okay. Well, then you know what? Then hold on. Then let's pause for a moment and
Sure.
And tell me what's the difference between ethics and morality.
Sure. So, like an ethical,
Unethical and something is immoral.
sure. So, like an ethical prescription would entail, like to the general society, and a moral is more to the character of the person. That's how I would
Okay.
differentiate it. It's a
Okay.
very small, like it's usually used interchangeably, but I prefer to just use the term ethical.
Okay,
Um,
so ethics is speaking broadly. Morality is on the scale of the individual, whereas
yeah,
ethics is on the scale of a society or
yeah,
people in general. Okay,
yeah.
so why is it unethical, in your view, for people to reproduce, to have children?
Sure. Just a quick, just one other small thing is that I know
Sure.
people who are parents and they
Yes.
later become antinatalist. So you can have kids and still be antinatalist later on.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah,
That people's perspectives change over time. Things I used to like, I don't like now. Things I didn't like before,
yeah,
I
yeah.
like now. That's part of growth. As you learn, you change, and I'll certainly admit that that is possible, and that given there's 8 billion of us in the world, that it's happened more than once. So with that understood, and please continue.
So I think the intuition that it's a most people have conditions in which they would have that they would be okay to bring a being into existence, and some conditions where they won't. And I think that the conditions in which they won't informs uh, my antinatalism, because it's. I'll give you a little bit of a background. Is that if I look at certain, so I think another thing is that I'm a vegan as well, and
Okay.
part of that, I used to do animal rights activism, and at the end of each demonstration, people would say, "We saved so many animals' lives today," and I thought to myself, "Well, we didn't save anybody. We prevented beings from coming into existence, right?" And however, this was seen as a good. Now, how would people situate that good would be different. But if it's good to prevent a being from coming into existence that'll suffer greatly and die, then there seems to be a value asymmetry between the existence and non-existence, where um, the prevention of harms would be good, and but the the prevention of harms would be good, but the prevention of bads wouldn't be bad, because the prevention of goods wouldn't be bad because the being doesn't exist. But if they exist, then what's good's good and what's bad's bad. So when you compare the states of existence and non-existence, there tends to be that asymmetry where it's in favor of not coming into being. And you can take an example of a wrongful life case where someone is to have I don't know, like a Tay Sachs, like I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Tay Sachs disease.
Tay-Sachs.
Tay Sachs, yeah, and
Right. So in case our listeners don't know what Tay-Sachs is, can you just give a very brief overview of what Tay-Sachs disease is?
um, I'd
Or,
have to
or,
Google
or
that.
I can help out if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah.
So Tay-Sachs disease is it's a recessive genetic condition, primarily found in Ashkenazi or European Jews. Excuse me. And if a child has Tay-Sachs, it's a very short life, usually measured in months or at most a year or two. Very painful, and there's no treatment. It's a genetic condition, and it's pretty awful. And um, most people get tested for whether to see whether they have this genetic recessive gene, and if both parents do, then there's a 50% chance that the child would get Tay-Sachs, and most parents choose not to would rather choose to abort a baby with Tay-Sachs than to have it. Not everyone, but that seems to be a pretty common choice.
Yeah,
So
and my thank you, Leslie. And this is appealing to common values that would tend to hold of preventing certain beings from coming into existence due to certain conditions. But if it's good to prevent those harms, even if there's no being there to benefit, then it seems to be the case that the prevention of any harms would be of benefit, even though life obviously has goods and bads. Uh,
mhm.
you know, so this is known as the axiological asymmetry, and then so that's more aligned what my antinatalism is aligned with. However, um, as I said, like this is an ethical conclusion to an argument. So arguments can lead to the conclusion, and other people have presented multiple arguments. So I'm just presenting one argument. So not to give the
Okay,
illusion that this is the argument.
sure, that's one of many, but
Mm.
I think that any reasonable person, and certainly I like to consider myself one, I will certainly agree that there are circumstances under which you should not bring someone into the world. Like if you have some genetic disorder, so that there's a high probability that your offspring will lead a short and painful life. If you don't want to have children, I think that there's no moral responsibility to do so. And in fact, I think we as a planet would do much better if we could find an ethical way to reduce our global population from where it is today. um, and there's personal desires, if yeah, right, and perhaps you don't have the wherewithal, whether it be emotional or physical or financial, to have children. So you give the example of Tay-Sachs, and that perhaps it would be unethical to bring someone with Tay-Sachs into the world, and I find that unobjectionable. I think that's if that's what people want, that's not a problem, but um, that's an argument that certain people should not be brought into the world, but not that's not really defending the stance that it is always unethical to bring someone into the world. So, uh, and so the one thing that you did say, and I'd like you to delve deeper into that, is um, life is full of joys and miseries. There's pain and pleasure in pretty much everyone's life. Different people have them in different proportions. If you don't if you don't bring someone into the world, there's no pain and there's no pleasure. But if you do bring someone into the world, there will be pain. And so, to minimize the amount of pain or suffering in the world, you just don't have children. Is that kind of the you called it the axiological argument? Is that a good summary of it?
Yes. I was using the example as an illustration of this asymmetry between existence and non existence,
Okay.
that it's a common held view that the prevention of the harms would be seen as good. But I'm making an extra argument of the um, the deprivation of the goods wouldn't be
Hmm.
bad because there's no one to be deprived of it. So
Right.
yeah, and but yeah, like once someone's here, the goods are good, the bads are bad. Um, but I think it's weighed in favor of non-existence when we are able to prevent the harms, and the goods are not a deprivation.
Okay. So, um, what would you say to someone, and I think this is true for many, if not most people, or at least a majority of folks, that say, um, I I want I'm a good and ethical person. I have found a partner, and we are devoted to each other. We both have a strong desire to have children, for our own personal happiness, and we will care for and love and take care of the one, two, or however many children that this couple has, and they will not, of course, be able to shield their offspring from the trials and tribulations of life. There will absolutely be pain and suffering in their life, but it is reasonable to assume that they will be as well cared for as any child. What is the argument that you would say to them that their stance is nonetheless an unethical one? And how would you try to convince these reasonable people that their plans as they stand are, from an ethics perspective, wrong?
When it comes to presenting arguments, I don't consider the persuasiveness of the argument. I
Okay.
think about the just whether or not it's going to cash out, like if it matches with my values and it's valid and sound. Um, I think that antinatalism is not an intuitive conclusion, and most people will reject it. And I think it's very hard to persuade. But when I look at my common held values, it seems to be consistent and follow. So, what I would say to in that particular case is that when considering creating a being into existence, um, the considerations you're making cannot be for the being because they don't exist. And once they exist, yes, absolutely. Like you want to do the best that you can. Um, but there was no need to create um, need from no need, if that kind of makes sense. Is
I think you may need to delve into that a little deeper too, in terms
So
of what
when a
you mean.
being doesn't exist, there's no interest, there's no agency, there's no need, right? And once a being comes into existence, they'll have interests, they'll have desires, they'll have dreams and aspirations and so forth. And I think that when like there's nothing in the ether wanting to come into existence. It's our decision based on um, wanting to create a being, but it could never be for that being. Is what I'm trying to get at. Um, so I'm going back down to that asymmetry between the two
Mm-hmm.
states. Um, Obviously, like if people, well, when my friends, they have children and so forth, I wish them all the best, and I'm just I'm not an activist for this kind of thing, but it is a belief that I hold, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think when evaluated uh, based on the prevention of the harms of life, uh, that it's weighed in favor of non-existence, and I don't think it's intuitive. I think it's more of a reflective thing that when you think about other cases where not creating into existence would be of benefit, or sorry, it would be like the prevention of the harms would be good, but I, then I would say like it needs to be. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't extrapolate to uh, all creation.
Okay. Well, I'm fine. I'm happy to explore unintuitive concepts. I mean, even things like the fact that the Earth goes around the sun, or the theory of evolution was quite unintuitive to pretty much everybody when they were first introduced. Theory of relativity, right, makes no sense at all, even to sometimes the to people who have studied it. And quantum mechanics, oh my gosh,
Right. Yeah.
right? And yet they are accurate descriptors of reality. So I think it's fine for us to explore topics that are complicated and unintuitive, but the way to understand them is to discuss them and their implications. So just to be clear, like with your friend that has children, you want all the best for those children, right?
Oh,
Because they
absolutely. Yeah.
already you want them to be healthy and happy and to be loved and to thrive. and so on. So your antinatalism is not a misanthropic perspective, and it's not a desire to cause suffering in people that are already living, or to prematurely end the lives of people that are already in existence. Is that right?
That's right, and thank you for highlighting that because there are people with misanthropic perspectives that believe that because humans cause so much harm, that it's best that we not procreate. My antinatalism is informed by philanthropic arguments, where I'm concerned about the being that comes into existence. So it's a consideration for their for the prevention of harms done to them, and now they're not mutually exclusive. You could be both. You can hold both positions that you want to. It would be a harm to the being that comes into existence, and by virtue of being here, that we inevitably also cause harms. Um, yeah.
So you could have someone, this is not someone I would think would be in their right minds, or at least, but you could have someone that says that humans cause so much harm to the natural world, to other beings, and to each other, that anything that we do that significantly reduces the human population, including mass murder, would actually be a net benefit to society. That's a kind of a psychotic interpretation, but one that somebody could hold.
Yeah, not just could. There are people that hold that, and this is
I
the
hope they don't have the power to make good on
neither do
their
I.
goals.
Which is why this particular topic can sometimes veer into it's like playing with fire. So that raises another question of how do you view death? Is death a harm? And I view death as a harm. Some people don't. Some people either see death being good for the one who dies, and they call that promortalism. And then there's another view called Epicureanism, or the Epicurean argument for death, and that death is nothing to us. It's not positive or negative. And the common view is in the literature is a deprivationist view, that death is a harm to the one who dies because they have projects and interests, and once death comes, you're depriving the being of all that stuff. But there can't be a deprivation for beings that don't exist because they never came to have those interests in the first place, or those preferences, and so forth. So those are three views. Now, I hold the deprivationist view, but yeah, there are people with darker views, and yeah, I'm glad they're not in power.
Well, and I mean, death is inevitable, right? And most people, and this is by no means unanimous, but most people seem to be coming around to the idea that we should prolong life. Like, we want people to thrive for as long as possible, and have a health and happiness span as well as a lifespan.
And
But
I agree with that.
but there comes a point where life can just be suffering. So I'm thinking of people who are very, very old and yet are still living, but for whom every day is a struggle. People with terminal diseases, and for which there's only pain medication and addressing them. And now we have made medical assistance in dying, and more people. It's still controversial even here in Canada, where it's been in effect for some time, but it seems to be spreading in more jurisdictions around the world, and it's about giving people more say about when and how they die, and having it not just be the whenever it is the cessation of heartbeat and brain activity. But does anti my sense is that antinatalism doesn't really have much to say about how or when people die, in and of itself. Although people who are antinatalists hold a range of perspectives, as you've just outlined.
Yes, absolutely. And again, thank you for highlighting that, because the antinatalist aspect of it is only concerned with the question of creating into existence, starting a life. the question of so starting life and continuing a life have different considerations, and those are going to touch on other aspects of ethics and philosophy and your views of of how you view death, or how you view even euthanasia. People are going to have disagreements about that. But antinatalism is specifically about the creating, not the continuing question. Uh, However, people do make that jump, and I think it's fair to make that. Because if someone's saying coming into existence is bad, then someone will. I think it's natural to say, well, if it's bad, then why wouldn't you end it as soon as, like, if it's that bad? And then again, my view is that, well, I'm here now. I have these preferences, I have these interests, and I have these projects, and life matters to me. But before I came into existence, I had none of those. There was no need. There was no reason. Sorry, there was no need for me, because I didn't exist. But as soon as you exist, then you've not just created the person, you've created a being uh, with those desires, those preferences, those needs, and those morally matter. And those are going to have different considerations, again, between the two questions. So, and yeah, so that's all. Yeah.
Okay, so yours is not like an instrumentalist. So I'm a secular humanist, and I really I base my philosophy and my morality on trying to create the societal conditions that would lead to human thriving. And when I say that, I want that not just for myself, although I include myself in what I want for human thriving, but also for my community, for my country, for our species as a whole, and for our collective descendants, our my children, everybody's children, and my hope is that this will continue for you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years into the future. My If you got your way, or if everybody peacefully adopted the anti-natalism view, and so the last baby is conceived today, and then people just adopted an antenatal view. Then 1 year from now, a little over 9 months from now, no more. There will be no more children being born, and give or take a century, a little over a century from now, there would be our species would go extinct. Is like that? That seems to me a fairly logical implication of the antinatalist view. Would you agree with
Yes,
that so
I
far?
would agree with that. Yeah.
And you
Small
view.
caveat: voluntarily. So,
Yeah. Oh no. No.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm. Let's absolutely put that in there, right? I'm
Yeah.
not. I'm against coercion
So am I. Yeah.
all these circumstances. So you would view our species extinction in a little over a century's time as a moral good, or like how would you like this? This does not make me happy. The thought that this would happen, but is that something that you would welcome? Like, tell me your thoughts on humanity's extinction by adopting an antinatalist view on a voluntary basis.
So for me, I would say that my feeling would be that of neutrality, just as I would feel towards other planets that don't have beings that are being deprived of anything. So if you think about Mars, for example, or you think any other planet that doesn't have life, we don't tend to uh, be saddened by their non-existent beings being deprived of the wonders that we've created here. I think that we are attached to them because we are here. Um, and but if we were to, I don't think it'll practically happen. But as you said, it's a logical uh, entailment of voluntary non-procreation. If everybody was to accept it, is that yes, extinction would come, and it would only be like I only think that beings have to be here for that to matter. If we're not here, There's no there's no there's not much to grieve because there's nobody to grieve. You know what I mean?
Hmm. I think I understand. I'm not sure I agree. So, in the
Okay,
sense that, um, uh, okay, so there's a couple of things here. So, uh, let's start with babies, with bringing someone new into the world, and
sure.
I would, if I were an antinatalist, I would say, uh, who am I from how can I ethically bring someone into this world, or play a part in creating a new life, a child, wherein it is certain that they will suffer to some extent.
Right.
There are going to be hardships in my child's life, and so given that some amount of certainty, some amount of suffering is a certainty, who am I to bring that person into this world? But the flip side of that is, um, who am I to deny someone their chance of life when there's the potential with all its opportunities for joy? Because I think even you, an antinatalist, will agree that, um, just as it's certain that there's going to be suffering in that child's life, there's going to be happiness and there's going to be joy, and we would be depriving the world of the potential. So. Um, uh, so I've got another follow up question, but talk to me about, why eliminating the possibility of suffering is dominant over eliminating the certainty of joy. Sorry, the eliminating the certainty of suffering is dominant over eliminating the certainty of joy and happiness.
Um, I would. So for me, I don't see um, the potential of good as a deprivation because they don't exist. So there is no entity there. But the prevention of those harms in our common sense view of other, if you match that onto other values of, say, just like what we talked about beforehand, is that the prevention of those lives uh, was a good. Now, how do we situate that good? People differ on that. But if it's good, then uh, I think it's weighed in favor of non-existence because nobody is nobody's is out there waiting to be born or being deprived, and there's a potential entailment with. Uh, it would be wrong to deprive someone of coming to existence because now it would be a type of pronatalist view where you would have an ethical entailment to bring beings into existence, which that exists. People, there are a very small. I don't. Well, actually, I don't know how small they are, but there are people who believe you have a moral obligation to create as many beings into existence. And
Well,
I
okay.
think,
I definitely want to come back to that. Like that'll be my next question. But I want to ask you, I want to ask you why you place zero value, on potential beings. I mean, you've because that to me that seems to be the crux of your argument,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
If they're only potential beings, they have no rights yet. We have no obligations to them. But like if someone dies, let's say a car crash or a sudden heart attack, and they were young, we mourn. We mourn not just the fact that our friend is no longer with us, but we also mourn they were, whatever contributions or whatever person they made, if they were an artist, if they were an activist, if they would have, there was so much they would have contributed to the world, and we'll never get to see their art or read their essays or listen to them sing or to experience their insights and enjoy their company. And we mourn we mourn that loss of potential that might have happened, that might have been. And I think I would agree with you that a potential life is given less weight than an actual one. But I'm not sure I would agree with you that we give it zero weight. So can you talk to me about why you give potential beings, potential descendants, potential children, zero consideration on these things? Because that seems to me to be fundamental to
Yeah.
the antinatalist position.
Um, so when it comes to a being that already exists, I fully agree with your description there.
Mhm.
And I do see death and the potential of the goods that could have happened as a deprivation to that being, specifically because they were in existence. So
Okay.
it's bad because they were here, and as soon as someone's here, the again you're creating those needs, you're creating those preferences, those interests, those attachments, those things that projects that we all, well, some like we share. Um, but then when we compare it to non-existence, there is no being. So I don't. So when if there's a being, they have every interest to continue to exist. Um, but with non-existence, no, there's nobody there to be deprived. But once you're here, deprivations can happen if you cease to exist.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question, then I want to come back to the pronatalism aspect of things. So, in Canada and in the United States and in other countries, there were certain disfavored segments of the population that were forcibly sterilized. And um, I think that that's a terrible stain on our country's history. And, but I'm trying to look at this through an antinatalist lens. And so there were no harms done to future generations from an antinatalist perspective because they were they, there were no children in existence at that time. So my question to you is, as an antinatalist, was that ethically wrong? And if so, what was the harm done to make that wrong in our nation's history?
I'd say yes, it is ethically wrong. And it's ethically wrong for the beings that already exist, in which you are infringing upon their bodily autonomy rights and um, and their interest preferences uh, uh, to do what they want with their body. Um, and I think it's important to maintain a pro-choice uh, a view on reproductive rights. What I support is choice, to think about whether or not you want to create a being into existence. The choice is yours, and the responsibility is yours, and it's a right that I believe that everybody should have.
Right. So the fact that these people were sterilized against their will is a harm to an existing being who has rights and privileges, and because those were violated, even if it means that they don't have children, which is an end that you might like, that doesn't justify the violence done to their bodies
Exactly,
against
and
their
I
will.
love the way that you're wording that. Yes, the ends don't justify the means. Yeah, just because uh, um, I could say that it would be a harm for certain, uh, like the Tay-Sachs disease. There's also another condition, and I'm sorry I didn't come prepared for that. It was there's this butterfly children where their skin like has really falls off, and they live for just a couple of years, and it's severe pain. And there's multiple conditions with that. Just because I say that the prevention of the creation of beings would be prevention would be good, it doesn't therefore follow that the annihilation of everybody would follow, or that we harm other people. And I would say that when you infringe upon people's reproductive rights, you are harming already existing people. And I don't believe the ends justify the means, of that it should be an informed choice, a reflective choice, a choice that you, a considered choice, and it's your responsibility for your children and stuff like that.
All right, so let's now turn to the other side of this argument, the pro-natalist view. I remember a few years ago, the Pope was complaining about basically European women who were choosing not to have children, and he called them selfish. I believe is the word that he used when saying that we needed to do that. We've had. Um, I think it's a fact that in most Western European countries, in Canada, Italy, Japan, South Korea, um, uh, the population is either falling, or in Canada's case, Canadians are reproducing, but barely at the replacement level, and our population is growing only because of immigration. And there are calls that we need to change that trend. We need to have more babies, and this has actually become part of the public discourse in the United States in the last couple of months. So it's actually kind of a timely conversation. Um, can you summarize what the pro-natalist view is, why people are arguing that it's necessary for us to have more babies, and then we can proceed to why you think that argument is flawed?
So, from what I've seen, is that it is a type of looking at a societal utility to bringing into existence for the benefit would be to the country or to the society, so that the society or country could thrive um, with more workers and more people contributing to society. And when populations decline, I think that they're arguing that we need to um, create more beings to help society out. And I think that's the majority of that's driving that pro-natalist view.
Okay, um, so what's flawed in that argument?
So I don't believe that uh, when we're thinking about ethical questions, that we should be looking at other humans as tools to an end, or means to an end. Um, I think that we should, like, ethically, that I would be considering whether or not the being is benefited or harmed, um, not what they can do for the society as a tool. And I think that view um, would be the unethical part for me. So
But
using people as means.
if you take the perspective that we need people in order um, to drive the machinery of society, like we need farmers, we need architects, we need bus drivers, and all the plumbers and engineers, all the things that make our society function, all the things that lead to the extent that we are thriving today.
Mhm.
We need people uh, to do all of the work that's required so that um, we do have a functioning society. So we do need people to contribute something. We do need them, I guess, as a means, but the end is so that that person and everybody else can also thrive. So uh, it's a mix, right? Like we need people to contribute, because if nobody did anything, then people wouldn't thrive.
Right.
There is some onus on the individual. We're using them as a means, but the end is so that that individual and everyone else in society at least has the potential to thrive. So is that blended view still does your argument stand against that slightly different perspective?
Can I ask you if this is a replacement, keeping the population the same or increasing the population?
Well, I mean, I don't know, right? I'm taking something on a I'm doing contrary to antinatalism. I mean, me personally, I think that the Earth is finite, and we cannot continue indefinitely to increase the population because at some point we will run out of resources, no matter how advanced our technology. To the best of my understanding, I think we should, in order to maintain human thriving for generations to come, millennia, that we do need to ethically and voluntarily reduce the overall human population. Um, I'd like to do it gradually so that we have time to adapt. So that's me personally. There may be those who would like to keep us at the roughly 8 billion people that exist today, and I'm sure there's lots of people that we need more. We should have 10, 12, 60 billion people. I'm not one of those, but there are those that hold that view. So to answer your question, um, you can choose. If it may be that somebody is already, let's say it's me that's wanting to maintain the population where it is or reduce it gradually over time, uh, but that still will require people, not everyone, but a certain number of people to continue to have babies on an ongoing basis.
I think practically speaking, that yeah, a gradual decline would be less bad, or it would be less detrimental to the system. But I think that this is contingent on the type of systems that you have in place, and if the systems are in place where there is a need to continue to bring new beings into existence, I think at some point that's going to go bust. Uh, with the additional uh, people, but a gradual decline seems to be less dramatic. Sorry, less impact. I don't know what's the right word. Like less of a hit. Um, but that it would, again, by voluntary choice, then there would be less beings that would need more resources. It would be easier on the system, and then it's slowly, uh, again, by people's choice, that they
Yeah, and I mean,
would
and
stop to.
increasingly, as in the wealthier countries in the world, as I mentioned, like Japan, South Korea, Western Europe, Canada, and then the States, that seems to be happening.
Right.
Some of those populations are shrinking in absolute terms, and others, as I said, are either shrinking or only growing because of immigration. I mean, these are the wealthier nations of the world, and so they are appealing to the poorer nations. But we have seen time and again that as a country becomes wealthier, the populace more educated, and women have more freedom and more choice, that um, uh, that populations or that the birth rate decreases, and sometimes quite dramatically. Sometimes it's not a decrease. Sometimes in certain cases it's a plunge. Um,
And that's happening without antinatalist stuff going on.
well, I was going to say, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that people are broadly adopting an anti-natalist view. I think.
Well,
I
that's my
think.
point. Is just like it's not even like people aren't thinking about like it from an antinatalist perspective, but consequentially that this is what tends to happen with more affluent societies.
Okay, so let me ask. We've restricted our conversation so far to humans, to people, and I'm wondering how broadly does your anti-natalist view apply? Does it apply just to our own species, or would you apply it as well to animals and the other kingdoms of life, the plants and the fungi?
I want to be very careful with this because there's heated disagreement within the antinatalist
Well, then
sphere.
then tell me what are these arguments, and then you can tell me your view. But what are the arguments? How, if they don't agree, what do they say on
Yeah,
either side?
so there are people. I think the majority, because there's been polls done, not scientific polls, but like opinion polls, where the majority believe that it is only applied to humans.
Okay.
And I think to then there are those that do extend it to all sentient life, and they extend it to sentient life because when it comes to ethical considerations, we tend to look towards not necessarily species membership, but whether or not a being can be harmed and benefited, and that's usually sentient beings. However,
Right, and we had an episode a couple years ago on sentientism,
nice.
which is like related to humanism, but expands the moral consideration not just to humans, but to all sentient life. So it's interesting to see this come back.
Yeah. And so here's my position is that
Mhm.
with the definition, it stipulates that it's an ethical position. And I think ethical prescriptions only apply to moral agents. So the responsibility or the ethical responsibility would be on moral patients creating moral agents creating moral patients or moral subjects or morally relevant entities. So the prescription is solely on humans, not to contribute to bringing other beings into existence. What's happening in a wildlife, I would say, is it's just amoral. It's not. It's wild animal suffering is bad, but it's descriptively bad. It's not. They're not held morally responsible or ethically responsible as moral agents that can reason would be held to those things. So there's that division between people who only say that it's just specifically human. Then there are those that apply it to all life, and then I don't know many people like me in the space, but that um, only say that this ethical conclusion is a prescriptive to moral agents creating beings into existence. And the example of that would be like breeding dogs or breeding farmed animals or any situation where we're artificially breeding beings. And I would say that that's the extent to which I'm applying it to other animals. So that's what I mean. Not necessarily what's happening in the wild is their thing.
So your view is, so just to be clear, you would apply your antinatalist view to dog breeders, even if those dogs are treated humanely and
Yes.
having a good life. It's still ethically wrong to deliberately bring the dogs into the world.
Yes, because a moral agent that can reason and have these ethical evaluations are intentionally bringing these beings into existence, and that's the wrong maker under my ethical view. Um, but again, not to the wild animals because I don't believe that they can be held ethically um, culpable for what they're doing. So this is specifically for moral agents. It could come a case where AI becomes sentient and they would be held morally responsible, or there's alien life in some other, sci-fi kind of situations. No offense to people who believe these things, but to me, to me, like it's the ability to have these ethical reflections and agency uh, to determine right from wrong, and that's where the anti-natalism prescription holds.
Okay. Uh, so I guess last question for you then. Uh, we talked about the declining birth rates where people are making choices and have the luxury of deciding that. But how prevalent, in your opinion, is antinatalism in Canada and in other places around the world? How commonplace is this perspective?
So it's a little bit complicated because of the varying views and
Sure,
the
right.
way
We can talk
people.
about the number of Christians or the number of Muslims in the world,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there's definitely disagreements about which branch of those faiths or those worldviews is the right one, even within that community.
yeah. So like, yeah, so that's the perfect example. So within the anti-procreative ideologies out there, some of them or adopt the term, even though they may be part of the voluntary human extinction movement, they might be part of the child-free movement, they might be part of um, other ideologies, but they believe like no one has the authorship of the term, and so when trying to figure out like how much of the population do anti-natalists make, it's going to be very tricky because of how people define it themselves and what is or isn't antinatalism, and that is tricky. But I'd say it's a very like, even if all the anti-procreative ideologies that I've seen, you put them all together, I think it's a very tiny minority. Uh, Even though they're a vocal minority sometimes, because especially with like environmental things going on, you'll see it more in the news. Like birth strike was a thing, and you'll see more and more people claim to have antinatalist thoughts or beliefs. However, again, just as you said about the religions, there's so much varying degrees, and I I think that if you support a procreation, so for the environmental, for example, when people say we need to have its birth strike to the point where the environment can heal, and then procreation's okay. Well, then I wouldn't call that an antinatalist perspective, because you're you're stipulating conditional procreation, which everybody has. Everybody has situations where it's okay to procreate, it's not okay to procreate. I don't consider that part of this thing, but obviously they'll disagree with me. um, but yeah, overall, from what I've seen, it's a minority, a very tiny minority view, but they can be quite vocal.
Right, and from an evolutionary perspective, the antinatalists don't have kids; the pronatalists will, and you'll be swamped out unless you win the if you win you win the hearts and minds of people through persuasion.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a selection pressure for
yeah,
yeah, we're
yeah.
not going to yeah, which is yeah why I'm not an activist, but I'll share my beliefs to people
All
if they
right.
ask. Yeah.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you for the time. Any last any last thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I'd say that if you're interested um, in the philosophy of antinatalism, because there's so many groups out there with their own ideologies, I recommend two resources to better understand the multiple arguments towards this ethical prescriptive conclusion. The Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy has an entry for antinatalism, and it gives varying arguments. And then also the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy under, I believe, Procreation and Parenthood, also has a section under antinatalism. And I trust just those two sources.
All
Don't
right.
go to
Well,
Reddit or Twitter. Kind of thing.
we'll link to those two sources in the show notes.
Sounds
So if
good.
you're interested, then look in the show notes, and you'll be able to find out more. So, Mark Maharaj, thank you again for speaking with me today on Podcast for Inquiry.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support at patreon.com/podcast4inquiry and give us a 5-star review. Email us at podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. Help us support rational discourse and evidence-based decision-making by becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join. CFIC is on the web, centerforinquiry.ca. We are on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter or X at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Zach Dumont and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazzaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood. See you next time.